Good evening or good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very honoured to be presenting this opening talk in the 14th International Ni-Cu-PGE Symposium in honour of a great friend and mentor and inspiration to many of us, Professor Tony Naldrett, who passed away, as many of you know, just a few weeks ago. What I hope to do in the next few minutes is just give you, to try and achieve an almost impossible task, and give you an overview of Tony's major achievements in his remarkable career. And it's a great deal to cover in a short time to do it in, so I will attempt to pick the eyes out of some of his major accomplishments to give you a bit of an idea of the context and just exactly how much Tony contributed to our science. So to take you back to the beginning, Tony's first experience as a geologist, the beginning of his career, was in fact as a mine geologist at Sudbury, working for Falconbridge Nickel, straight off the boat, literally straight off the boat from the UK. He took himself to Falconbridge's office in downtown Toronto and talked himself into a job. That's basically where the whole story started. So during the course of his work as a geologist, discovered a fascination with these intriguing deposits and wanted to know a lot more about them. And particularly at the beginning, wanted to understand a lot more about the sulfides and what the nature of the mineralization actually was. So that was his first job, and that led on to an MSc at Queen's University with J.E. Howley, who was one of the pioneers of Surrey geology. So from that, Tony went on to a PhD, and his PhD work was on the ultrabasic rocks for the Porcupine area. This is the area which is now well known as one of the type localities of Komatiites, but Komatiites weren't a thing then, nobody knew what they were. A large part of Tony's PhD work were looking at these rocks with these very strange textures in them, which turned out to be olivine. They were called chicken track textures universally by most people who worked on them. But anyway, Tony's first sort of major achievement was to realize that these things actually represented crystallization of ultramafic liquids. And that was a major heresy at the time that he published this paper. This paper, Naldrett and Mason, actually came out just ahead of the classic seminal papers by the Viljoen twins, which really put Komatiites on the map. But really, Tony was one of the first. So finishing his PhD, Tony went off to another famous geological locality, the geophysical lab of the Carnegie Institute, worked with one of the legends of experimental sulfide petrology, Gunnar Kullerud, and produced a number of seminal papers, including the first one to really come to grips with the origin of pyrrhotite pentlandite textures. And that's a classic paper published in 1967. And then another one published some years later on the iron-sulfur oxygen system. These papers are still cited today, and they're really part of the foundation of our understanding of the phase equilibria of magmatic sulfides. And importance really can't be updated. So at the end of his time at the Carnegie Institute, Tony moved to the University of Toronto, where he stayed for the rest of his career. In fact, he went on a visit, had a chat with Professor Nuffield, who was then the head of the department. And after the conversation, supposedly Professor Nuffield chased him down the street and offered him a job on the spot, which he took. So and the rest is history, as it were. So his first projects were continuing to work on Sudbury, but also following up on his work on what were now officially designated Komatiites. And Tony was involved in the initial discovery and documentation of a remarkable locality, the famous Pike Hill in Ontario, named after Dale Pike, who wrote one of the classic papers. One of the first really major studies, and still to this day one of the seminal studies of Komatiites, was by Nick Arndt, who was one of Tony's early PhD students. And produced a string of papers, including this classic one, published in 1977, and now racked up well over 500 citations. One of the most cited papers in igneous petrology on the komatiitic and iron-rich tholeiitic lavas of Monroe Township. And anybody ever has a chance to go there, it's a wonderful place. So continuing that work and continuing his fascination with magmatic sulfides, another really important paper came along in 1973. That was to do with Tony trying to come to grips with this particular sort of sequence of textures that you saw in Komatiite-associated nickel sulfides, and a thing called the billiard ball model, which I don't have time to explain to you, but I'm sure you will come across it if you're working in this field. So that was one of the early sort of major papers. And in fact, from my point of view, this was actually the first paper I ever read on magmatic sulfides as an undergrad at Cambridge. as a consequence of which, I actually, among other people I wrote to Tony Naldrett looking for a graduate spot in graduate school, and that's what took me to Toronto. So that's a very significant paper in my personal history. So carrying on through the late 70s, Tony had a series of students and postdocs doing experimental work looking at elemental partitioning, and out of that came a series of very important papers. Some of the first papers to really come to grips with numerical modeling of sulfide silicate olivine interactions. One of them by Duke and Naldrett here, which is one of the first ones to try and model how olivine and sulfide compositions vary. And again, this is a real kind of foundation text for our science. Another major development, this happens in the late 1970s, published in 1978. Tony hired PhD student Eric Hoffman, who's a chemist, and Eric developed a technique for analyzing all of the platinum group elements, all 6 of them, using a combination of a nickel sulfide fire assay and a neutron activation analysis technique. This was really groundbreaking at the time, substantially improved our ability to analyze platinum group elements at low temperatures, and this led to a string of really important papers. And it also led to some of the first work being done looking at platinum group elements in very low levels in terrestrial magmas. And this was work by Sarah Jane Barnes. This was published in Chemical Geology, has now close to 1,000 citations, and is again one of the most highly cited papers in the whole of igneous geochemistry. In the late 1970s, around about the time I was starting my PhD with Tony, Tony started getting interested in platinum group elements or deposits of platinum group elements rather than purely the geochemistry. The joke was this came about at the time because the nickel price was plunging, but platinum was starting to look pretty interesting. So Tony was following the economy and doing what would now be described as a pivot from nickel-focused studies to platinum group element studies, and that led also to a string of very important papers. One of them, the most important one, being this one here, The Birth of the R Factor. Ian Campbell was a postdoc with Tony at the time, and came up with, again, another real sort of foundation text leading to an improved understanding of the geochemistry of platinum group metals, and also a model for the origin of Morensky type PGE sulfide horizons, which I was lucky enough to be included on, and that was published in 1983. At this point, I should mention, we're talking a lot about Tony's specific scientific accomplishments, but what underpinned a lot of this was his remarkable ability, firstly, to see to the heart of the problem, but also his personal skills in getting people to work together and getting people to collaborate and share ideas. And that came about through a variety of mechanisms, but one of them was a thing called the Friends of Forsterite, which was a regular meeting of Tony's graduate students and postdocs. It used to happen in people's houses around Toronto, and out of that came the R Factor and a great many other really sort of important developments. It was all really to do with creating a great social environment for science to be done, and I think this is one of Tony's real attributes and skills that led to his very great success. And another example of that is his work in Russia. Tony became really the first Western scientist to really make substantial inroads studying the very important Norilsk deposits. And a lot of this, again, came out because of his great ability to network and interact with Russian scientists and build their trust and develop collaborations. And a whole series of very important papers came out of that, which you'll be able to find all of these references on this PowerPoint, by the way, which will be archived on the website. Some foreign studies, I'm running out of time, so I'll have to gloss over these a little bit. Work on Voisey's Bay in around about 2000. Lots of work in China, initially with a PhD student, Gong Chai, and then subsequently with Chu-Si Li, PhD student and postdoc, working on first on Jinchuan and subsequently on some other deposits, primarily on Jinchuan. And then the whole thing culminating in Tony's magnum opus, this Springer book, Magmatic Sulfide Deposits, which is really a summary of a large part of Tony's career. String of awards, which again you can find. You can find the citation for Tony's Penrose Gold Medal, the Nobel Prize of Economic Geology, and And finally, again, to pay tribute to Tony's remarkable ability to create a great social environment and a wonderful inspirational setting for his postdoc students, collaborators, and friends to work together and create great science. So he was a great scientist, a wonderful man, and we owe him an enormous debt. And I take great pleasure in dedicating this online symposium to his memory and his achievements. Thank you very much.